everybody, it is Monday the 16th of October. We're having a very peculiar day here. As some of you will be aware, the remnants of Hurricane Ophelia has been making its way up through the mid and North Atlantic towards the British Isles and is due to be hitting the west coast of Ireland about now as a tropical storm rather than as a hurricane, but it's still a grade 3 tropical storm, which is very unusual kind of weather for us to be having here in the UK and in Ireland. We have a very peculiar quality of light at the moment. I've taken some footage from outside the flat and also from work, and you'll be able to see in the footage I took outside just before I came in that the sun is a very small red orb at the moment, quite hazy featured. And the reason for this, it seems, is that as the hurricane and now tropical storm has been moving its way through the Atlantic, as I mentioned the other day, it's a cyclonic wind, which in the northern hemisphere means it rotates in an anti-clockwise direction. And so it's pulling, the air is pulling an awful lot of sand from the Sahara up into the upper atmosphere, which is now, as it moves across Ireland and the UK, is turning our sun red and giving us a very, very odd weather situation in terms that the light is very peculiar. It's extremely warm but incredibly windy both at the same time. It feels almost clammy, it's so warm, and yet there's quite a strong breeze blowing outside. So it's very odd weather we're having. I hope that everybody who's watching is safe, and particularly anybody who happens to be in Ireland, who I think are going to be bearing the brunt of this tropical storm as it moves across these islands. The worst will happen over the next 12 hours or so, and by this time tomorrow it will have blown itself out as a major force in Britain and Ireland. So that was a bit of a weather forecast for you. So that's where we are with the weather. I thought I would address a couple of corrections and issues that people have mentioned in the comments. Not negatively mentioned, it's just they have been mentioned. First of all, I was talking... Toby, don't put your face in front of the camera. How can people see me? If come over here if you want to. Come on, come here. No? Yes, there you go. That's a good boy. You come sit over here. Don't block the camera then. Bob and Wendy told me to say something, and I've completely forgotten now what it was. I had thought about it just before I sat down. It's a sign of getting older, I'm afraid. However, I'll talk about the other significant issue that has been raised. I've done a couple of videos at work talking about the CCTV department and my office and where the CCTV is stored on the buses. And one or two people have raised a concern that this is obviously a security matter, and should I be showing this much detail on a video? And it is a valid concern. It's something I thought about. It's something I talked with the finance director about before I recorded the videos, and we both came to the conclusion that it wasn't actually a concern for two reasons. The first is my office is a double-locked, mortise-locked door with an electronic lock and then an ANPR gate and electronic pedestrian gate, plus the site is manned 24/7. So the possibility of somebody breaking into my office is remote, particularly because my office, although it's in the office block, faces out into the engineering department, and the engineering department is the department that is actually manned virtually 24/7. So in terms of showing what's actually in my office, to be honest, most of the data is not stored in my office. Most of the data is actually stored elsewhere in the building, in another in secure cabinets in another locked off store cupboard. And yes, the monitors have a monetary value, and the computers have a monetary value, but every office in the building has a number of these items there, and in fact, you don't need to know that they're there in order to know that they're there, if you see what I mean. There would be a lively expectation that an office block, every office would have at least one computer and monitor within there. So if somebody wanted to break into the building, they wouldn't be breaking in because of what they'd seen. They'd be breaking in because they knew that the equipment was already there. And as I say, in terms of the data itself doesn't have any value, except insofar as it helps to establish what actually happened in a given incident. The likelihood of, first of all, the likelihood of someone involved in an incident on our buses actually being a viewer of this channel is fairly remote. But the likelihood of such a person breaking into the office and knowing where in the office to find the data, and given that the data is actually highly unlikely to be in the office unless it's happened in the last week or two before an incident has occurred, means that it's quite a far-fetched scenario where somebody would actually benefit from breaking into my office to steal the data. The onboard CCTV, again, there is a question of security in that I showed the kind of locking and secure systems we have. But again, unfortunately, due to the terrorist incidents that have happened all over the place in the last couple of years, where large vehicles have been hijacked and used as weapons to injure and kill people, there is a heightened level of security around vehicles being left unattended in the first place. So for somebody to actually steal the CCTV drive with data on, they would have to gain access to the vehicle, they would have to gain access to the locked cupboard and gain access to the locked drive. And all in order to get CCTV from a specific incident, because there's no point stealing the CCTV drive from bus A if bus C was the one that was involved in the incident. Again, the likelihood of somebody going to all that effort and the likelihood of us not having got that data before they get to it is fairly remote. But there is a bigger concern than security, in fact. And one of the things that we have been quite keen to stress with our CCTV systems is the transparency of operation. And this is not just a PR matter. There is a legitimate and real concern about invasion of privacy and infringement of civil liberties by the use of surveillance equipment in public places. One can argue that the bus company depot is not a public space, that it's a private location, it's a private corporation, and nobody should be on the site without permission, and so anybody who comes onto the site knowing that they will be being monitored. And arguably a bus is also private property, but the bus operates on the public highway, and the sense that the general public has of its public transport systems is that they're not simply private property of the corporations that operate them, that there is, at least morally, a public aspect to their operation. And so it's vitally important that the people who travel on public transport in Oxford, in my particular case, but also in Wallingford and High Wycombe, where we also operate and where I also manage the CCTV systems, it's very important that people appreciate that although there is a degree of surveillance in that whatever happens on that bus for a period of time is being recorded and is going to be stored until it's overwritten after a certain period of time. And of course, I'm not going to talk about what that length of time may be, because that would be a matter of public concern, because somebody who wanted to make false allegations would know only to wait until a certain length of time had passed before being able to make those allegations, or to make that allegation about a past event longer than the period that the CCTV is available for. Again, we don't get many of those, but the possibility exists that that can happen. So there are two things that we do with the CCTV to make it transparent. The first is that there are certain international and British standards that we measure ourselves against, I suppose. That there are guidelines issued by the statutory authorities. So the Information Commissioner's Office and the Surveillance Camera Commissioner are the two significant public interest bodies that supervise all CCTV systems. And the Information Commissioner does so from the protection of the data point of view, and the Surveillance Camera Commissioner from the invasion of privacy and the right to a private life and the surveillance aspect. But there are also voluntary standards on top of the statutory standards that you can adhere to. And as a company, we have decided that we wish to get the external recognition that we adhere to particular standards when it comes to the operation of our systems. And that will include the nature and quality of the installation, because one of the important things about CCTV, if you have it installed, it has to be properly maintained so that it works. And you also have to have images of sufficient quality that things can be identified, so facial recognition of an assailant or a criminal of some kind, that the cameras are pointing in a direction such that they are likely to capture the kind of incidents that occur with buses. So, for example, we have a camera pointing along the two sides of the buses, which gives a good view then of interactions with cyclists on the near side and offside, for example. Because our roads are narrow, we have large vehicles, and there is a duty of care to cyclists. So that's part of operating a fit-for-purpose system. So it's very important that the public understands that although we have systems, we are regulated quite closely by government agencies, but also adhere to voluntary standards which are even more detailed than the government's minimum requirements. And this becomes even more important because of the use of bus CCTV by the various police forces in whose areas we operate, where we assist them in the prevention and detection of crime. And it's more important even than a private company not misusing CCTV systems, that a public body such as the police service doesn't misuse that data as well. One of the interesting political points, I think, from my point of view, to anybody who understands constitutional law and constitutional politics, government is there on the one hand to protect the vulnerable and the weakest in society, and to order society in such a way that the weakest and the most vulnerable are not taken advantage of. But at the same time, every system of government has to put in place quite significant checks and balances on the power of government, because giving government all the power and then not actually having any way of controlling those who exercise that power is really just moving the tyranny from private individuals to public officers. So it's very important that when the police access the onboard CCTV from our buses and coaches, that they do so adhering to the statutory requirements of the system's operation, the statutory requirements that the Police Investigatory Powers Acts require them to follow, and also act in a way that the general public can have confidence that the systems are not being misused for private vendetta or political ends. And so it's, I think, overall, the balance of transparency over security in this instance. I think the balance tips towards transparency. That obviously security is important because the data should be protected so that it can't be simply accessed and misused by other people, but at the same time, letting people know what you have and how it operates serves a public good. So I hope that goes some way to addressing some of the concerns that people have raised about the CCTV systems, and perhaps some of the concerns that they haven't raised. And if anybody has any more comments about it, I'd be more than happy to read those comments and maybe comment on them further in a later blog post. Now, I've talked for a while and I cannot for the life of me remember what it was that Bob and Wendy wanted me to say. My mind is just a complete blank. No, I just cannot remember what it was. That's awful. They only told me yesterday. I only thought about it a couple of minutes ago. If I stop the video and I'll come back, and I hope to have remembered. That's funny, it came back to me almost the moment I turned it off. Of course, it was about the swan-upping. I mistakenly said that it happened in May every year. It happens in July every year. Because, and rightly, it was pointed out to me that in May the adult swans would be pairing, but their cygnets would not yet have hatched. By having the swan upping over 4 days in July, then the cygnets will have been hatched, and so the new swans will also be counted. So thank you, Bob and Wendy, for pointing that out, and I pass that on now to all of you so that you know. So if you happen to be in Abingdon or London or any point in between in July next year, you may well catch the event of swan upping. So I think I will call that a day today then. That's the two things that I wanted to talk about, just to provide some clarity. And the weather, well, the sky seems to be clearing up a little at the moment. The winds are still quite strong, but it has got less red here than it was in Oxford. So as I say, I hope any of you who are in the path of the storm that you stay safe and stay well, and I will speak to you all again tomorrow. So until then, thank you and goodbye.